Salam everyone, and welcome to this discussion on International Human Rights Day, hosted by Sanad Human Rights Organization. Today, we're focusing on the human rights situation in Saudi, where severe restrictions on freedoms continue to grow. We're joined by three experts who will share their insights. Today, we have Fuad Kauthar, who'll explore the deterioration of human rights in Saudi Arabia and the key factors or the reasons behind it. And then we have also Mohammed Mandour, who will discuss the realities of press freedom and the repression of journalists in the country. And also we have Joey Shia, who will join us and who will give us an overview of how international human rights organizations view the situation and the challenges they face in their work. And before we end this discussion today, we will have some time for people to chime in. But for now, let's get started. So I want to start with Joey because I want to look at we want to look at this from a very macro level. So Joey, thank you so much for joining us today. Um, I want to ask first about how do international human rights organizations view the view human rights in Saudi in general?
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me as well?
Yes, I do.
Great. I have to apologize. I've lost my voice in the last few days, so everyone will have to just sort of bear with me as I croak my way through my remarks. But thank you so much for hosting this important space to Sanad on Human Rights Day, and thanks so much for inviting me. So at Human Rights Watch, we've covered Saudi Arabia for many decades. I've had many predecessors before I came into this role just a few years ago. And it's our position that under Mohammed bin Salman, particularly since 2015, but more intensively since 2017, Saudi Arabia has been experiencing the worst period for human rights in the country's modern history. And this is across a range of issues, from freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, to the wanton use of the death penalty for cases involving child defenders and for cases, lacking even basic due process. In addition to some of the cases that we have seen in recent years, involving human rights defenders and just normal Saudi citizens who happen to have tweeted something even vaguely critical of Mohammed bin Salman and his authorities, winding up being sentenced to decades-long terms. And this was something that prior to 2015 and 2017 was really unheard of in Saudi Arabia and in the course of Human Rights Watch's work on the country. Of course, there have always been rights issues, various violations of women's rights. However, the extent of the repression and the crackdown since Mohammed bin Salman himself came to power is unlike anything our organization has documented previously. And I think if we really get into the nitty-gritty, if we look at this issue of sentences for human rights defenders or average Saudi citizens, as I said, for many years even before Mohammed bin Salman, of course, there were human rights defenders who were arrested arbitrarily, who were sentenced, but never before had we seen sentences like Salma al-Shihab's original sentence, which was 34 years based purely on her peaceful Twitter activity, or Mohammed al-Ghamdi, who was originally sentenced to death based off of his purely peaceful Twitter activity. And these were even retweets on an account that, I looked at myself that had very few followers. Of course, his sentence has been reduced, but still it's still a decades-long sentence and is utterly outrageous. So yeah, very, very broadly, we have witnessed like the severe deterioration in the human rights situation in Saudi Arabia. And just one last file that we work on is the issue of migrants on the border with Saudi Arabia and Yemen. So about a year ago, we released a report detailing some of the most egregious abuses being conducted by Saudi border guards along the border between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. And we documented peaceful asylum seekers, men, women, and children, Ethiopians mainly, asylum seekers, attempting to cross the border from Yemen into Saudi Arabia. And they were met with explosive weapons and were being shot at arbitrarily by Saudi border guards with no warning whatsoever. And this was a very clear escalation in the issue of the border, unlike we had ever seen before. We had previously documented issues of detention in Saudi Arabia involving Ethiopian migrants and asylum seekers in the south, and they were subject to pretty terrible detention-related conditions. But never before had we documented Saudi border guards shooting at women and children who were peacefully attempting to cross the border. So maybe I'll stop there, but just to say, across a range of different files, we have documented a very severe escalation in the human rights crisis inside of the country since Mohammed bin Salman came to power. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joey. Thank you for your insights and the information that you provided. I think it is important to see what other human rights organizations have been doing in regards to what's going on in Saudi, because I think, in my opinion, there is silent oppression, and without these organizations, a lot of people, and without us also, like as defenders, a lot of people wouldn't know what's going on. I'll get back to you with another question, and I hope you feel better, Joey. So I wanna ask Mr. Fuad, who's also Saudi. So welcome, Fuad, to the space. And I want to ask you, to what extent do you think the human rights situation in Saudi is deteriorating, and what are the reasons, in your opinion?
Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Hopefully my voice is clear and audible.
Yeah. Thank you. Alaikum salam.
Alaikum salam. Thank you, Asrar. Wishing you all the best, Joey. I think we met in the Washington conference about 4 or 5 months ago. And I think you understand Arabic, to my understanding as well. So going back to the question, Asrar, if we just screen through 2015 up to this December 2024, we'll be shocked actually of the magnitude and the massive abuse of human rights across the country. So 2015, we had the Hacking Team Company, which is an Italian company that works with states, that was actually contracted by bin Salman regime to spy over the citizens in the country. And after that, a British Guardian newspaper, the 2017 to 2018, posted that millions of inquiry messages to track citizens while they were abroad, in particular in London and in Washington. These messages spanned between 2 to 13 times, inquiring the location of these citizens that were at that time in London or in Washington in particular. If we jump to NSO and its Pegasus, that was contracted for 55 millions. And we all recall what happened to Jamal Khashoggi, the martyr, that actually was hacked, or his phone was hacked. And after that, he was tracked all the way down to the embassy in Turkey. We can go to 2021, actually between June 2018 and June 2021, Ben Harbert phone was hacked by Pegasus as well, because he covers the country topics disclosing corruption. And then he wrote a book titled MBS in March 2020. Jeff Bezos also had his phone hacked, and after a conversation through WhatsApp with bin Salman in January 2020, and a trial was put, and bin Salman had to pay him a fine just to cover for that scandal. Then also bin Salman admitted in 2023 that he is fostering sports washing just to increase the GDP of the country 1.5%. And he said, well, if I have to do this, I will do it. So he's confessing that he's doing sport washing just to cover for his human abuse issues. And now in December 2024, Play the Game Institute reports that the regime is fostering 910 sport events and spending hundreds of millions of dollars just for sports washing. So just this quick skimming through all of these human abuse issues tell us the horrifying issue that this country under bin Salman and his father has never seen anything precedented at this deterioration of human issues, actually.
Thank you, Fuad. Thank you. And I think there are many abuses, as you said, like, hacking, and we've seen a lot, like, ever since he was he took a place, and he was in power. He's been in power, of course.
Exactly.
And yeah, I think the abuse of using media to hack people, and of course, like, all the abuses that Joey mentioned, it's a lot. But thank you for your insight, and I'll also get back to you for one more question. And also, to reflect on that, I want to ask Muhammad from CPJ. Hi, Muhammad. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to ask, given your experience on journalism in general, can you tell us more about the reality of press freedom and digital freedom in Saudi Arabia?
Thank you so much, Shaswa. I hope you all can hear me, and thank you, Joya and Fuad, for your wonderful intervention about the situation of human rights in Saudi Arabia. I will start with the article that Jamal Khashoggi wrote in 2017 when he wrote Saudi Arabia wasn't always this repressive. Now it's unbearable. I just can't imagine that this article was written before the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, while his most recent article before he was killed was talking about that the most things that the Middle East needs now is freedom of expression. Yes, Saudi Arabia was always a repressive regime, as Jamal said, and journalists in Saudi Arabia was mostly subjected to different ways to silence them. But what we have seen under MBS is a completely another level of repression against press freedom. Started with the arrest of several journalists in 2019, and before that, the murder of Jamal Khashoggi started also with advancing the tools that the regime is using to repress the independent journalists in Saudi Arabia, including arresting several of them, including using spyware to hack many of them, Saudi journalists and also international journalists, as Fuad perfectly described. This notion started also with the expansion of Saudi Arabia transnational repression to silence who also journalists and writers outside the country, and misuse of the current cybercrime law in Saudi Arabia to silence press freedom advocate and writers and journalists and bloggers who deem to criticize Saudi Arabia policies or MBS policies. In the last year, at least we at CPJ documented In addition to other organizations, of course, we documented the arrest of Hatem al-Najjar, who is the host of the popular podcast at El Murabba. Hatem was arrested simply because of his old tweets criticizing Saudi Arabia. We also this year knew that the well-known cartoonist Muhammad al-Ghamdi, known sometimes as Muhammad al-Hazza, he is a well-known cartoonist for Lusil, the Qatari-based Lusil newspaper, was also sentenced to 23 years in prison after he already spent 6 years in prison in Saudi Arabia. So also a Turkish journalist was just visiting the country to cover a sports event, was arrested for a few days just because he has tweets criticizing Saudi Arabia murder of Jamal Khashoggi. What I'm trying to say here is that Mohammed bin Salman regime didn't differentiate much between Saudi journalists who are inside the country or even international journalists who are visiting. We have Jordanian journalists in prison. We had a Sudanese journalist also was in prison in Saudi Arabia. We had a Yemeni journalist who was in prison in Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia has become a place where Saudi journalists and international journalists are in jail, all forced to be silenced. On the other level, we have seen, in addition to using spyware to hack journalists, we have seen infiltration of social media platforms such as Twitter, and now we have a case against Saudi infiltrators who give MBS regime access to some data about Saudi users, and we believe that some of this data was used, for example, to arrest journalist and famous Twitter user Turki El Jasser. So on the other hand, we are seeing a lot of investment in sports, what we call sports washing, but also as Saudi Arabia moves to any field, regardless it's technology, it's sports, it's business, it's whatever, it's try always to silence other narratives that might bring a different idea or a different narrative that's in contrary to MBS narrative. A few months ago, we have seen a British journalist being banned from attending a boxing event happening in UK because this journalist is critical of Saudi Arabia and calls Saudi Arabia investment in sports washing. And now Saudi Arabia is trying to host the World Cup, while a few months ago arrested a Turkish journalist covering sports event in Saudi Arabia. So with the expansion of MBS regime and absence of any accountability so far regarding Khashoggi or regarding any attacks on U.S. citizen or even U.S. journalists, what we are seeing is more encouraging and emboldenment for Mohammed bin Salman to expand this attack without any potential accountability now or in the future. I will stop here, and I'm happy to answer your other questions.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you. I mean, press freedom is the most important way to deliver what's going on when it comes to human rights violation, right? So oppressive environments always target journalists as a way to silence, to cover the violations, to continue the tyranny. So thank you so much, Mohammed, for your insight. I want to go back to Joey, and I'd like to ask you about the role played by international human rights organization, and also the challenges facing the work on human rights organization in Saudi.
Thanks so much. And thanks as well to Mohammed and Fuad for their very important comments as well. So I think the role that international human rights organizations like HRW, like Amnesty can play, it is, I think it's absolutely critical. But I also think that, we need to be important about the different roles that different organizations can play. So, for example, next week, actually, Saudi Arabia is hosting the Internet Governance Forum in Riyadh. And the Internet Governance Forum, or the IGF, is a multi-stakeholder process through which the sort of foundations of internet governance is debated and formed through a variety of different stakeholders, including civil society, which has been core to this process for many years, basically since the IGFs were formed. And year after year, civil society organizations, activists, human rights defenders, digital rights focused researchers attend the IGFs throughout the world. Last year it was hosted in Japan. But this year in Saudi Arabia, of course, there are huge obstacles to many of the individuals who would be normally attending this conference being able to attend. And in fact, groups like Access Now, SMEX, regional organizations that have a very important focus on digital rights and freedoms are simply unable to attend because it's far too dangerous for them to do so. Given all of the very crucial points that Mohammed brought up earlier in terms of Saudi Arabia's use of Pegasus, its targeting of human rights defenders, its surveilling capabilities, and whatnot. But what I think the role that groups like Human Rights Watch can play is exactly in these circumstances. So we are planning to attend the IGF next week, and we're able to do so because we are a much larger, international organization. So we have a platform that grants us relatively more safety and security than smaller organizations that don't, simply have the range and scope of platforms that we have the privilege of having. So I think that's, the important role that organizations like ours can play, where we can attend these events and we can, be on the ground there in Riyadh for, I think, what will be one of the first times that, groups like HRW and Amnesty will be able to go and speak directly in Riyadh about the human rights crisis inside of Saudi Arabia and raise cases like Mohammed al-Ghamdi, Asad al-Ghamdi, Salma al-Shihab, all of these cases of detained civil society activists and normal Saudi citizens directly to Saudi officials and on the ground in Riyadh. And I think that's very, very powerful. And it's something that we can do as Human Rights Watch, given our platform and the security that grants us, that other small organizations would struggle to do. So I think that's an important part of our role. And I think, also, we contribute in ways by doing very deep dive research into new issues. So very recently, we released a report about Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, the Public Investment Fund. And this report took us many years, probably way too long than it should have, but it was nearly 100 pages of detailed research that looked into the links between the Public Investment Fund and human rights abuses. We went all the way back to 2017 and the corruption crackdown at the Ritz-Carlton, and we found that assets that were seized illegally in 2017 wound up in the PIF. And we also raised this question about government spending in Saudi Arabia, given the amount of spending, the significant spending that the PIF is investing in giga projects like NEOM, the Jeddah Central Development Project. These giga projects that are paving the way for luxury shopping districts, for tourism. We asked the question as to whether these projects are actually realizing the economic rights of Saudi citizens, particularly when you look at the rates of poverty inside of the country. I think there is the perception that Saudi is a very wealthy country, and it is indeed. It has an incredible amount of resources at its disposal, but there is gross inequality in the country as well. And there are many, Saudi citizens and residents and migrant workers and other marginalized communities that live in poverty and don't have access to these resources. And so I think when we look at the PIF and we look at the lack of transparency and accountability that we documented through this research, we really put the question to Saudi citizens and residents of what do you want your public wealth to be doing for you? Do you want it to be going to projects like NEOM, or should it be being invested in healthcare and education and other types of social services? So I think that's also another important role that human rights organizations like HRW can play, is we have the ability to do these longer term projects that look at the PIF, and we have the ability to contact businesses that are either already doing business with the PIF or considering doing business with the PIF, and engage with them directly to make sure that they're doing their due diligence assessments and evaluating the human rights impacts of these types of investments. So yeah, I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Joey. Yeah, I think it's very ironic and mind-blowing that the IGF will be hosted in the country, giving all the surveillance on people. That's been, and everything that's been going on regarding surveillance in general. But yeah, we all look forward to seeing human rights organizations discuss this during the forum. Thank you so much, Joey. I want to go back and Fuad and ask about what should the world know about human rights in Saudi, because honestly, in my opinion, every time I talk about my brother, who's like Mohammed Al-Hazza, I always get the look of that we are privileged and not a lot of people know about human rights violation in Saudi, which is also mind-blowing. But yeah, so what do you think the world should know about human rights in Saudi?
Thank you, Asrar. And before I answer this question, I would like to drag the attention of Joey, because she's or one of her colleagues is going to the country for the GIF next week, that on December 9th, which is yesterday actually, the officials in that country released a statement that all employees, regardless of their rank, are now obligated to prove their wealth, the sudden wealth, in terms of financial and possessions, like cars, boats, palaces, whatever. And they will be held questionable if any ambiguities happen or arise. So we can right away shed the light on bin Salman and his sudden wealth, because in 2016 he was only on the sixth rank, whatever, in the government, which is barely about 7,000 riyals a month. And we can see now the magnitude of wealth that he possesses. So if we can shed lights on this one, and I think it's worth looking at, Joey. Going back to the question of what should the world know about human rights in Arabia, actually we need to reflect on in Syria right now. What happened 3 days ago, and a swift crackdown of Bashar al-Assad and his regime is basically a reflection of what is happening in my country. We're talking about around 110,000 prisoners in Syria. Now we're talking about 60,000 plus prisoners in Arabia. Talking about 24 years of conquering that country, and talking about Syria. Now we're talking about only about 7 or 8 years of bin Salman and his father taking over our country. I do not term it as ruling. It's just they're simply conquering the country. That we are up to more than 60,000 prisoners. So we can see the comparison, the actually shameful comparison that we have reached to. Where are we heading? It is actually very dark, and unless the country, I'm talking about the citizens in my country, start to get rid of the fear that they are feeling right now, and look at what the Syrian citizens has done over the past 13 years to regain their freedom, we are going to be in a much deeper trouble, actually, in a horrifying situation, more than what is happening or what happened actually in Syria for the past decade. The situation is very dark. Situation is actually horrifying. It is massively deteriorating, and we need to actually be alert that things are going to be only getting worse and worse. If I can end up with that, because of what happened in Syria, I'm getting daily information actually from inside the country that Bin Salman is scared, and he's easing the tension right now on many presidents and prisoners in the country. He's calling their families to come and collect them. Talking about tens of them now, but I'm looking for freeing all 60,000 without question. And why is he doing this? Because he knows that freedom is contagious, and it's going to spread around quickly. So he's trying to cover up for himself, because we know that whenever he freaks, he starts to give in without being afraid. He simply continues his tyranny. What happened in Yemen, what happened with the Emirates, what happened with Iran, all of these are actually just show and prove that whenever he is scared, he starts to give in. So I may conclude with this, that we need to move. The country, my country, need to move. The citizens need to start moving, needs to start throwing off the fear and actually starting to regain their freedom. We are under a conquering regime. It's not a native regime that we can rely on and hope that it's going to make things better. We need to regain our freedom by working to regain that freedom. And I may end over here unless you need me to shed more lights.
Thank you so much, Fuad. Yeah, thank you for reflecting on what happened to Syrian prisoners being released. And I do agree regarding the comparison. And yes, there are a few people who were released that I personally know. So I hope, as you said, the rest will be released soon, because there are so many. And again, that example would show that those prisoners, first and foremost, are allegedly in prison. So the fact that a few are being released just shows that fact. Thank you so much. So I want to go back to Muhammad, and I want to ask you about some of the examples besides the examples that you mentioned regarding Khashoggi, Allah yarhamu, and the rest. Can you just give us more examples of cases of repression of journalists in Saudi?
Thank you, Asfa. I think we have many cases to talk about, from your brother Muhammad al-Hazza to many who are currently in prison. But what I actually want to shed the light on is how difficult it is to know how many journalists are now behind the bars in Saudi Arabia. So in Saudi Arabia, as many of you know, it's really hard to do human rights work from inside the country. It's really to understand what's the status of the due process to every journalist, and why actually they are in jail, and what's the recent update why they are in jail. We sometimes knew about cases after 1 or 2 years, because the regime is not only targeting the journalists but also silencing their family members. Many of the cases that we actually know about, we couldn't get approval from the family members to write about these cases and to shed the light on, which actually make us in some sort of ethical dilemma. While we are shedding the light on some of the cases, we know that other cases are not giving enough attention, but this is, we understand, because of how MBS is imposing a well-orchestrated regime of silence on everyone. Many of the journalists who even were released in the last 2 or 3 years, they are afraid to talk about what happened to them in prison. They are afraid to go back to journalism and write again. And the examples are many. Many of them actually are US citizens and live in the US, but they cannot speak about what's going on in Saudi Arabia. Many of them are still inside the country and they cannot leave because they are under travel ban, and they cannot leave the country or cannot comment about what's going on. We are losing the critical voices that used to tell us about what's going on in Saudi Arabia, and to some extent, unfortunately, MBS has managed to impose some sort of blackout over the country where we cannot know everything happening inside. We can only know what he is trying to tell us about what's going on inside the country. One of the cases is the case of the Saudi cartoonist Muhammad al-Hazza, and I stopped a lot in front of this case to understand why a regime is sentencing someone to jail to 23 years after spending already 6 years, and because of what the regime calls solidarity with another country that's already Saudi Arabia is in a kind of normal relationship with, which is Qatar. It is a message. It is a message to every journalist, either especially those who are outside the prison, that even if you criticized a country, or not even criticize, you provided your own opinion about something at some point, the regime will never forget this. The regime will keep remembering this and will use its own tools to keep you in jail. When the case of Hatem al-Najjar, who simply in jail because when few years ago he wrote something critical to Saudi Arabia, and now he is being in jail for this tweet. It makes people not only question what they are saying now, but makes people also question what they have said many years ago, and they know that the cost is very high for just writing a tweet, for just opening up your mouth, for just whispering to someone. While to a big extent Mohammed bin Salman managed to silence many Saudi journalists, I think his current role now is to silence international media, and he is using several tools to do so, including relying on PIF investment, including using the media for sports washing and other forms of whitewashing, and try to portray a different picture of Saudi Arabia as a hub of technology, as the country will host IGF, the Internet Governance Forum, while it is actually the country which is a hub not for technology but for digital repression, as MBS now in a race with UAE to attract more international corporates to open data centers. We at CPJ and other human rights organizations are raised how dangerous this for freedom of expression inside the country, how Saudi Arabia might manipulate the AI to spread misinformation and disinformation and to target journalists, and they have already done this to journalist Ghada Weiss. The fact that the data of journalists maybe around the world, or journalists from Saudi Arabia, or data from media outlets might be stored in data centers in Saudi Arabia, where the country lacks a good data privacy law, when the country has a history of infiltrating other corporates such as Twitter raised a lot of concerns among the press freedom community about where is their data are gonna go. What is the future of the narrative about Khashoggi? What this generative AI models will tell us about who killed Khashoggi? What is the status of the status of press freedom and freedom of expression in Saudi Arabia? So it is a moment now for all the organization, I believe, working on Saudi Arabia and the human rights situations there to diversify its advocacy to corporates who are engaging in a business with the country, to media outlets, to government. And in the US here, we are expecting a president who is in a good relationship with Mohammed bin Salman and also partner in different businesses. We are also expecting partnership when it comes to digital repression, specifically spyware, because up until now we haven't seen real accountability for NSO and other spyware corporates who their technology were one of the reasons behind the killing of Khashoggi, but also hacking hundreds of journalists around the world. So the future for press freedom in Saudi Arabia is very, very challenging from the technological aspect, from the geopolitical aspect, from lack of global accountability from governments and Western government hypocritical stance on democracy and press freedom in Saudi Arabia. But the moment, as you all mentioned, in Syria is very inspiring, seeing people coming out of prison. And we should say that MBS regime is not better by any chance than Bashar regime. And if we ever see the people and the people who are currently in jail in Saudi Arabia to give them the mic to speak about what they have endured inside the prison, we will be shocked by the stories that were kept for years inside this prison, and because of this well orchestrated silencing regime that MBS is adopting. I will stop here and I'm happy to engage again in that conversation.
Thank you, Muhammad. Yeah, I think it is important to reflect on how many journalists are in jail in Saudi. And my brother's case, Hamd al-Hazza, is an example, right? So, I mean, it's a case that nobody knew about for almost 6 years. So yeah, I always think and reflect on like how many other journalists are in prison that we don't know about. And the rest who are actually in Saudi, but you know, they're banned from traveling. So it is worth you know, noticing and shedding lights on journalists in general in Saudi, because their voices are very important. Thank you, Joey. Thank you, Fuad. Thank you, Muhammad, for your insights and everything. Now we will just have time for people if they have any questions.
If I can just add something, Asrar, if you
Yeah,
don't mind.
of course. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
just three topics, because so far we are talking about citizens. What about those who are not citizens of our country? Let's talk about Kingdom Uncovered, that documentary that was released less than a month ago. How about NEOM, where we have actually 21,000 deaths of laborers since 2016 up to date? What about the Goat Life documentary? We're talking about people, humans, that not citizens, and actually are tortured, are overworked, are jailed for no reason, or for reasons that are out of law, actually. We also need to consider this while we are talking about human rights issues in our country. Thank you.
I mean, there are so many things that we need to shed lights on. It's not about, as you said, like it's not about only Saudis. It's about any humans in Saudi whose rights were taken and violated because of the regime. So yeah, it is really important to shed lights on everything that's going on. That's been going on for years right now. Thank you so much, Fuad. I don't know if Joey or Muhammad has anything else to add. You're welcome to unmute yourself.
Thanks. I just want to say thank you to Sanad and to you, Asrar, for hosting this important conversation. And just to close with a little bit of a plug for the IGF next weekend. We will hopefully be in attendance. That's our plan. Who knows what will happen at the border? And we're hosting a conversation about Saudi Arabia's cybercrime law. And the UN Cybercrime Treaty in Riyadh. And Lina Al Hathlul will be speaking on the panel. She will be speaking remotely and will be sort of zoomed in, but the rest of us will be in Riyadh on the ground, and it will be streamed live, so folks can also listen in. And I think it will be pretty powerful to have a human rights defender like Lina sort of speaking to an audience inside of Riyadh about all of the human rights issues that have come from Saudi Arabia's cybercrime law. But yeah, thanks to everyone on this really important panel. I learned a lot.
Thank you, Joey, and we look forward to seeing you guys there. Best of luck, and we're excited to see what you're gonna bring to the table. I'm pretty sure it's gonna be good stuff. I don't know if anybody else wanna say anything.
Yeah, just one final note. I really would like to thank Sanad again for the invitation and just shed the light on the importance of Saudi human rights organization and the important role they are playing. They are actually the eyes of the international community in what's going on in Saudi Arabia, and they are the expert on the situation there. So thank you so much for bringing so much cases about what's going on inside the country now. As IGF happening next week, I have a message to journalists who are going to cover this event first. Really, you need to take care of your digital security and other aspects of your safety while you are inside the country, and CPJ is happy to help and support with this. But also, while you are there, you should remember that other journalists will not be able to attend this event because they are currently in jail or because they are forced to stay silent. So while you have the mic, you should give this mic to these people who are currently silent and shed the light on their cases and ask why Mohammed Al Hazza is not attending this event, why Turki Al Jasser is not attending this event, why all these journalists and bloggers in Saudi Arabia are not attending this important event. And again, thank you for all the speakers and those who couldn't have speak today. Really, it was a great opportunity.
Thank you, Muhammad. Yeah, I think again, like there are many people who are in jail, and there are people who are not in jail, but they're silenced. They're in Saudi, but they're silenced. So yeah, it is important to reflect on those people who cannot be in that event. Thank you all for joining us today on International Human Rights Day. It's been an enlightening and thought-provoking conversation about the current state of human rights in Saudi, with valuable insights from our speakers. I just want to say that today, let's not forget to keep mourning the beautiful souls that we've lost, those who loved our land and its people sincerely. Let's also remember the countless innocent humans who are still in prison as we speak right now. Today is a reminder that the fight against oppression is ours only to carry. And I hope we always reflect on our role in the struggle, whether our actions are large or small. Because collective resistance is our greatest power. As Mahmoud Darwish once said, the butterfly effect cannot be seen, the butterfly effect endures. Thank you again for our speakers and to everyone who joined us today. Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you.